Welcome to the High Rise Podcast, presented by Headset, the leading data and analytics company for the cannabis industry.
Welcome back to the High Rise, a laid-back, data-backed conversation on all things cannabis, where we cover U.S. MSOs, Canadian LPs, products, and market analysis through the lens of data. Today, we are joined by a very special guest, Matt Hawkins, managing partner of Entourage Effect Capital. Welcome, Matt.
Hey, Sai. Thanks for having me. Hi, Emily.
Hi.
Yeah, thanks for joining. And as always, Emily Paxia of Poseidon.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the High Rise.
All right. Well, my favorite day of the week, my favorite conversation of the week, always so much to cover. Real quick, the big headline that came out today was the introduction of the Cannabis Administration and Opportunity Act, the Booker, Wyden, Schumer story here. You know, we've been talking about this for a long time, so much that it almost felt like we'd never see anything. So the draft is now out there. It's pretty hot off the press. Haven't had a lot of time to dig into it. I think it's notable that it's out there now, that there is something. I think that like everyone out there, probably going to be difficult to see this thing across the line, but it is early stages, and I think there's some time yet before it's introduced as proper legislation. Any thoughts on this, Matt or Emily? Anything you guys want to touch on? Anything notable?
I think the biggest takeaway for me is, as it looks right now, it's more taxation upon already abundant taxation, and if this bill passed the way it is currently set up, then it would just further enable the illicit market to thrive. And so, the positives are that there could be listings on the NASDAQ, the New York Stock Exchange, could be some type of a safe banking act set up or construct that would allow, obviously, wide-ranging banking services, perhaps including debt, which would be great. But you said it right, Sai. I mean, I don't think there's any way this thing passes the way it is. Is it a good step? I mean, absolutely. I mean, we should all be excited that there's at least this type of progress. I guess I get a little nervous when people start making comments like, well, Schumer's not going to negotiate this. I mean, that makes me nervous, because the last thing you want is something like this that's bipartisan to be subject to a filibuster. And I think there's a lot of room to wiggle here.
Yeah, I mean, I think they threw down the gauntlet on a focus on, making sure that we really right the wrongs of the war on drugs. And, when I back up and from a full holistic point of view, I couldn't agree more. And it's what we're all really working towards when we're trying to decriminalize and legalize cannabis. But I think there are a lot of aspects to this that are not business friendly, and specifically are not small business friendly. And so if we are trying to create an industry with access points to people who were wrongly targeted on the war on drugs, then I think that this is going to make it even harder to do that. And so I think we just have to, I think there's a lot of well-intentioned pieces to this, but I think that if you play it through in the long game, it could actually have some deleterious effects. So we just have to be really mindful from a business standpoint. And then I think as an industry, what we have to do is get really clear about how we can think about our quote unquote big businesses and how they can work to support and foster growth of smaller independent businesses in the cannabis industry. So in the absence of legislation or lawmaking that'll really do that and support the smaller businesses, the bigger companies are going to, I think, have to step in and fill in the gaps there. But I agree with Matt about the taxes. I mean, this industry has said, we would love to be legal and we will pay taxes dearly in order to do so in every state that we've been in, and especially in California. And I think his point is spot on about, but if you tax it too far, there is a tipping point. And tax studies and sensitivity studies have been done for decades in order to understand this. And California is a living example of how you keep an illicit market alive and well through overtaxing an industry on every angle. So, I mean, for goodness sakes, they figured out to tax cigarettes in order to make them more expensive and to cover the costs of taxing cigarette or of smoking and all of the challenges that creates, but they taxed it to, deter consumer purchasing of cigarettes as a part of it. And I think that if you think about it that way, it's like you're deterring people from participating in the legal market. So, it's a big and bold move, and I'm glad it's out there because they've been talking about it since March. or even longer than that. And now it's time to, go into that wonderful process of the comment period until September 1st and then see what happens after that. But there's a lot to dig in on this thing. It is a massive piece of legislation.
Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to reading the draft and kind of digging in. I haven't had a chance to do that quite yet, but it does look like we have a bit of time before September 1st where they are asking for comments. And hopefully, this is something that gets us some way there. Just the opening, what I've read, it does start with the war on drugs has been a war on people, particularly people of color. And I think that's, an important statement to remember. Yes. And great to see that called out. But it's such a nuanced challenge to get this thing across the line. I just saw a headline today, in the New York Times that the Republican side is struggling to deliver 10 votes needed to beat a filibuster for the infrastructure deal, which is supposed to be bipartisan. And this is something that is getting to be more and more bipartisan. There's more Republican support for legalization. But I think it's going to be a hard road in the world where we can't get things like infrastructure across the line. But hopefully, we get progress.
Yeah, I think that brings up a good point. Just listening to the two of you, I mean, we're talking about two different issues here that are bundled into one. I mean, we all want the sins of the past to be corrected, and I think that the Democrats would probably serve themselves well to separate these two items because because if the Republicans don't support the sins of the past, they're going to look like complete idiots. But then secondarily, if there is a bill that's just 100% business driven, then I think even dumb politicians can look at some of that stuff and say, okay, some of this stuff makes sense and some of this doesn't. And you can make it focused on what's important to the industry right now from a business standpoint. And when you cobble them together, you got too many issues coming up and the Republicans can hide behind things that may allow them to, sweep this under the table when the reality is you just put them both out there. Why not do it that way? But again, I'm not a politician, never want to be, and this is just one of the things to do.
Yeah, it's very well said. It does seem, it's very complex and there's a lot of moving pieces here. I think the nice thing is to see the headline. I think if we had this conversation 2 years ago, this would be everything everyone's talking about. But now it just kind of feels like,
that's right.
this
is
nice. It's
still progress. It's progress. That's exactly right.
Still progress. Yeah. So hopefully things move faster. After so much time in the industry, I'm starting to feel a little impatience. And I think as it gets closer and closer, you get a bit more of that impatience. Like, let's get moving here already. There's more and more states with legal markets. What's taking so long? Starting to get a little impatient, but it is progress, and that's a positive sign, and we're moving in the right direction. We're having the conversation, so looking forward to seeing what this looks like in its final form, and fingers crossed that we can pull something out here and actually see some change in the near term. Well, Matt, thanks again for joining us. And we talked a little bit about this over, I guess, the last few weeks, Emily, Sublime deal and Harborside. And I know you're close to that. Maybe you can give the listeners a bit of your background and, how you're connected to this deal. And would love to kind of talk about, how you think about Sublime and, Harborside and, why this deal was so great for those organizations. So love to hear from you on that.
So probably a bit of background would help first. We've been investors in Harborside in one form or fashion since 2015. We initially invested, we were part of a group that came in to be the majority owners of the farm in Salinas. And then when the laws changed in 2016, we were able to create a holding company and we merged everything together and became large shareholders of Harborside. And then our firm led the Series A round for the combined company. I've been on the board ever since. Long story short, our firm became very frustrated with the lack of movement from the board over the course of the past 4 years now. And so we led a dissenting shareholder movement last fall. We were prepared to go through a proxy fight. Luckily, we negotiated with the company and we took over the company at the board level. And so we made it, and we were very public about it. We just said, look, we are going to make Harborside, if not the preeminent single state operator in California, we're going to make it one of the preeminent single state operators in California. We had the platform to do it. We had what was becoming a world-class cultivation center in Salinas. We had the iconic brand of Harborside at its, in its retail locations. We wanted to become even more vertically integrated by adding manufacturing, adding more cultivation, and adding more retail. And we were going to do that through accretive M&A activity. And Sublime is step one in that process. And Sublime fills the manufacturing void, plus it gives us the number one pre-rolled brand in the state of California to capture margins and all that. And so it's a win-win for us, but it's a step to a step because, this is what I hate about being chairman of a publicly traded company is I want to talk about it all day long and there's only so much I can say. So suffice it to say, there are some things that we're working on at this very moment that could be announced as soon as the next couple of weeks that are going to make the changes even more present and focused. And I think all the shareholders for Harborside and future shareholders going forward are going to be thrilled because look, the reality is it is in my opinion, and I think a lot of analysts agree, it's there is so much value right now sitting there because it's so underpriced. I mean, the value is, it's an arbitrage play at this point. It's crazy. And and a lot of it is due to the sins of the past, which is what we are here to clean up. And one of the other things we said is that we were going to eliminate our 280E liabilities, and we've already started doing that. The D'Angelos did a wonderful job, starting this iconic brand, but Steve D'Angelo told me himself back in 2016 he was not the guy to take it to the next level. And unfortunately, we had to go through one failed CEO stint with someone that came in, and we had an interim CEO in the process, but we're about to name a new one. And so things are changing. We just raised a large pipe that helped execute the close on Sublime. Sublime brings excellent management. Amr Iqbal is one of the best operators in the industry. Wow. He comes from Amazon experience, supply chain management, which is second to none. And Harborside needs that. And so we are very, very fortunate to have him. And, hopefully he'll be in the C-suite before all is said and done with the work we're doing now on these M&A transactions.
Yeah, I mean, we've been an investor in Sublime for the past couple of years. I, by the way, I could not agree more about Amr. He's a truly exceptional operator in this industry and somebody who I've loved getting to know and rely upon. His acumen is kind of unrivaled in many spaces. So I agree with you on that. I think one of the things, and Matt just hit it all on the head completely, and just because I have a kind of a perspective just from the California market angle and vertical integration and focusing on really strong momentum product categories. I think that this is a very savvy move, and it's a lot of things that get said around consolidation is 1 + 1 = 3. And I think that's really what you hit with this combination. I think it's, bringing a legacy brand like Harborside that really was a trailblazer in this industry, something that I don't know about you, but many of us, when we got into it, it was like, oh, the Harborside store in Oakland is like the pinnacle retail experience in cannabis. It's, just blockbuster numbers. And I remember like the day that Colorado, opened its doors, watching Steve D'Angelo on CNBC and like just thinking about, oh my gosh, this is the industry we're all going to be participating in building in, so there's a lot to that. But I think that a lot of people have been scared away by California, and I've actually talked with the regulators in California about this because it hasn't been a friendly market to operate in. It's been completely competitive with the illicit market because of the taxation issues and the licensing issues, but it does feel like the winds have shifted a bit in California to more of a tailwind than a headwind. They've been taking some steps to improve the process. They're really pushing to try to get the provisionals into the confirmed licensing structure, and the numbers, I think, are going to just continue to be big out of the state. I think there was some hindrance of growth with the implementation of Proposition 64 into the regulated market, and we all knew there would be friction points. But I think in the long view, this market is definitely one to have a deep and strong exposure in, and I think that's what they set up here with this combination. So I'm pretty pumped about it. As an investor in Sublime, I'm excited about it too. So.
Well, Emily knows the market in California, as good, if not better than anybody. And I would say that, in addition, and she's spot on, but the other thing that it's not just people being scared or being unable to operate in California, but it's also you're also talking about the big MSOs. So there's also, we've been very,
Yep.
very clear about this. I mean, if we can build this and get this to the level that we think it should be trading at, then we become a very attractive acquisition target for the big boys. And Emily and I know all them. We know them. We've known them since 2014, 15, 16, and our firm was lucky to be an early investor in a lot of the big boys like GTI. And so I talked to Ben a lot, and we've sold several companies to Curaleaf, and I've actually spoken to Boris about it. And in fact, we were on a panel together, a podcast panel during the pandemic where I told him I'd got something I was working on in California, and I want him to buy. He's like, great, figure out that state and sell it to me. And that's really,
Yeah.
and it's tongue in cheek, but it really isn't. I mean, and that's the entire premise here. It is so much easier said than done in California, and Harborside had a significant advantage because the one thing that Harborside has is one, history, and two, they know the regulatory system in California cold, and so you don't just start a business and have that. And so that was a huge head start for us, and the fact that we're now at the precipice of building something and adding something that will require integration, but nevertheless it's going to get the attention of not only MSOs but also the institutional investors that are entering on the public side to start buying the stock.
Yep.
Talking about quite a bit, with the SSOs kind of starting up in California, potentially moving to the east, organizations like Glass House or Parent Company. But that's a really interesting idea of the MSOs as they look to come to California. Why not come in, bring in an operator that has figured it out, that has that experience. And yeah, the D'Angelo certainly. I mean, I remember way back in the early medical days, like them battling in courts. Medical only, no adult use, and just really changing policy. And, policy continues to change, and being on top of that and understanding how the state works, that is a big advantage. And bringing in brands like Sublime, which, pre-rolls are the number one or number three category in California, right? In a growing category. And, Sublime and the Connoisseur. I mean, I know they do a lot of different types of products, but the Connoisseur pre-rolls, the hash infused pre-rolls, and being so successful at it, I mean, that's an attractive target for someone like a larger MSO in the future.
Yeah, it is. It's tough. I mean, California, they really had that long, kind of loosely regulated medical market, and then they had to make it into a really pretty strictly regulated legal market. And I think that sometimes the first ones through the glass are the bloodiest, they say. As really fund managers in this space, I feel like I've got a few flesh wounds. But, I think that Harborside kind of went through that too. I mean, there was no doubt that they got targeted on the taxes because they were out there in front, and they were out there loud and proud. And so I think sometimes you kind of get an undue level of scrutiny and focus, which is why they fought it for so long. I'm excited. I think this is the year that we see California take the turnaround and really start to garner the attention that it deserves as truly such a wonderful market.
Yeah, and speaking of California, there was an interesting article this week in MJBiz about brands going directly to consumers, the omni-channel strategy. I mean, it's something we've seen in, plenty of other categories. You have all the way to Dollar Shave Club, selling their products now at Target as well as direct to consumer. They started as a direct to consumer brand. This article was more on the flip side of that. A lot of brands that started with the retail channel, brands like Kiva, for example, were noted in the article, that have now expanded into a direct to consumer. I certainly see, why they would consider that, access. And California is a unique market in that it does enable that. That's not in every state. I mean, there's not even delivery in some states, like, where I'm at in Seattle, Washington, without lack of delivery, let alone delivery direct to consumer. So how, Matt, how do you think about a brand like Sublime that has a good retail distribution? And then you guys look at Harborside to be more vertically integrated. Are you planning on getting your brands into more stores as well as potentially going direct to consumer? Or are you thinking of the Harborside as the outlet to the consumer there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, we've got this is setting aside Harborside for a second, and I'll just putting on my fund management hat, and I'll talk a little bit about another one of our brands, Thunderstorm, which is a gummy brand that it's that sometimes it's number one, number two, number three in the state, but they've gone down that path, and I think that while that article is important and it's real, there's not a whole lot of volume going through that type of a channel, and I think that for the time being, the delivery aspect and the retail aspect of that the dispensaries bring I think are going to remain, virtually intact. Does that mean that that's not a direct consumer isn't a path that we all need to start considering and should be considering? Well, of course, but we said the same thing about delivery less than 2 years ago. So it's another one of those parts. It's just an evolution, and that's okay. But look, Neiman Marcus isn't going away, and the Gap's not going away. They may struggle, but they also have an online presence during the recession. But they have an online presence, but they also have walk-in locations, and I think dispensaries are going to be no different. And by the way,
yeah, great.
There's also, but real quick, but the other thing about that is that, one thing going back to the Schumer bill is that, this isn't going to, I think we all understand that right out of the gate, this isn't going to be, interstate commerce. And so every state's going to have their own regs, and ultimately we all probably feel like in some form or fashion, when it becomes up to the state on how they want to oversee that, when it becomes federally legal, it's going to look a lot like the liquor business. And so there's going to be things that we either can do now or can't do now that may get reversed. And I think, maybe a direct-to-consumer platform is something that might not float, or it may create another, level in the tiered system that we're not aware of right now. So just, a lot of those things are so variable driven that we just don't know.
That's a really good point. We talked about that a bit last week with some marketing challenges in California, the billboard law that's coming through on the interstates, and the parallels to alcohol and advertising, and what does that mean? And with federal legalization, what does it mean for things like direct to consumer? You also made a good point about brick and mortar. I mean, the direct to consumer model, when you think about the big notable direct to consumer brands, these internet brands that kind of came around, brands like Casper mattresses, if you're familiar, Warby Parker sunglasses, they're moving to a brick and mortar.
That's right.
They're building stores, right? And I think that a lot of that has to do with your point. It's discoverability. People have to find these brands. If you are a strict direct to consumer brand, the amount of marketing that you have to do to generate consumer interest is quite extensive. I mean, that's their whole playbook, Casper's playbook. It's all marketing margins, right? How much they can spend on these different marketing channels. And as these channels get saturated, because there's other mattress companies that come in and fill that void, they have to find other channels, and it just gets tighter and tighter. So they're looking at brick and mortar, and we're kind of going the other way, like starting at brick and mortar, going direct to consumer because it's a new channel. But I think discoverability is going to be hard, and marketing is hard for brands in cannabis, even in the current landscape. When you're so limited on Facebook ads and Google ads and Instagram ads, these places that direct to consumer brands were built on, and you don't have access to them in the same way. So I think it is certainly going to be harder. Maybe, they discover a brand and they become loyal to a brand, and maybe they want to be able to order that brand, but they're, going to a retailer already. And so maybe that's part of their habit. They're used to going to that retail store. So it will be interesting to see. You're right. I think the article mentioned is a very small percentage yet of the business, a very small percentage of brands doing it. I think it's still challenging, and they're building on the kind of top of existing delivery networks, it sounds like. But certainly in just like the laboratories here, every state's different. It's kind of a unique model to see, how it's going to play out in California. Will we see it in other markets, or will it fizzle out in California? Will it be successful? It'd be interesting to wait and see.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. And it'll be interesting to see what strategies the retailers employ to try to hold people within their channel too, instead of just sidestepping around them. Because I could see a lot of replenishment ordering happening in the D2C space, like the tincture you always buy and that you take every month, and every month you have to buy it or whatever it is. But it is hard on the discoverability. And, I feel like you can look at, like, for example, CW Hemp's filings to see the majority of their business has shifted to D2C, but they really have kind of lost expansion of their market share in some ways because they couldn't get people introduced to the products through that brick and mortar experience. And even to your point, Matt, about the Thunderstorm products, Kana gummies are actually one of my favorite gummies in the market. But I would never have ever stumbled upon that product if a person working behind the counter, a retail associate, hadn't recommended it to me.
Right.
And it's no fault of Kana's. It's just that in a world of all of these products, how do you know? And so the word of the retail associate still is very important if you're able to articulate what you are looking for, and they can guide you to the products that are a good fit for
Well,
you.
and that brings up another good point. As you know, I've always used the analogy when the first time I walked into a Harborside, the store in Oakland, after legalization was fully implemented from an adult use standpoint. I mean, I had heard this like, well, our demographic has changed somewhat, and tongue in cheek, all of a sudden it looked like there were a bunch of soccer moms in there. And the truth of the matter is that once the stigma was gone, they walked in there, they were having, getting stuff for their wine and cheese parties, but it was just people that didn't ever frequent a cannabis shop before. And and to Emily's point, they needed to be educated. And so the more and more and more people that are coming into this space on a daily basis that are being, and it's not the ones that are being converted, it's the ones that are entering the space because the stigma is gone. They need to be helped. And the D2C model, to Emily's point, doesn't necessarily teach you, how to start that process. And so I think that's an important thing to remember. And that's why, and the other thing is that, look, like in a liquor store, you may have a particular tequila you like, but do you want to go to the same spot to buy your beer and wine? And so it's the same thing. You can't typically, the brand, the one thing about the brands in every state is that some are very good at edibles, some are very good at tinctures, and some are very good at flower. And so the stores have all three, but you can't go to one stop and get it online. So I don't know. I just think the retail aspect of this is always going to be in play, and it doesn't really concern me from a retailing standpoint.
Right. Yeah, you had me laughing on the tequila thing because Drizzly's totally got my number after the pandemic. They're like, you must be running low on your Fortaleza of tequila. And I'm like, yeah.
Well, let's be clear, Emily. I didn't say vodka, and I said tequila because of you.
Look, I like very plant-based.
I understand. Okay. Well, I guess potatoes were grown in a root. Vodka is grown in a root with a potato, but that's okay.
I can't get as excited about a potato as I can an agave
I'm with
plant.
you. I trust me.
Different strains of agave.
Many years.
Yeah. Talk about like Drizzly, man. They have my number, but I still go in because I'm like to your point, because I do like wine and beer, and so I go in because there's so much to think about and to check out. So it's a very good analogy. Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. And when people shop at cannabis, when you look at the baskets, it's a mix, right? They're not just there to buy one brand, one type of product. They're trying a multitude of different strains, different brands, all that. And which is direct to consumer. It's not like a mattress. It's not like eyeglasses, right? Where you're not buying mattresses every week or a few times a month, and buying different mattresses together. It's kind of a one-off purchase. So that analogy is, I guess, a little different. They're just brands I think about with the D to C. So yeah, it is going to be interesting. And maybe the ultimate answer is to be a little bit of everything, like Harborside, where you are vertically integrated and you have a retail footprint and you have a brand footprint, CPG footprint, and you're able to distribute that however you want, whether that's through other retailers, through your own retailers, or direct to consumer. And that's the sweet spot right now until we figure this all out. Well, we're right at time, Matt. I want to thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it. Always a pleasure. And maybe we can get you back here after some of those announcements you alluded to, because it's always interesting to kind of hear about what's going on in the biggest market in California in the legal cannabis industry and all the moves that are being made. So thanks again for joining. Great to hear your perspective on all this, and looking forward to chatting with you again.
Thank you for having me. And as Emily knows, I've seen her in person in San Francisco, and I'm out there traveling, and I can't wait to get all back together. And so, if not by MJBiz, kind of not before, maybe we can do this in person next time.
That sounds great.
Sounds like a plan.
Thanks for listening to the High Rise Podcast, presented by Headset. For more information on Headset, visit headset.io.